So Joe Biden's prostate cancer diagnosis remains the talk of politics. And I want to talk about something that's maybe a little bit uncomfortable, but I think important. So David Axelrod, who I know we are friendly, I don't know if we're friends, but we are friendly. We work together at CNN. On Sunday night after the Biden prostate cancer diagnosis announcement said, and I'm quoting here, that conversations about Biden's mental acuity, quote, should be more muted and set aside for now as he's struggling through this. Basically saying the conversation occasioned by the book by Jake Tapper and Alex Thompson called Original Sin, which is out on Tuesday, the 20th of May, that those conversations shouldn't really happen now because Joe Biden has prostate cancer. I disagree. And I don't want this to be, and please don't, in the comment section, tell me I'm heartless and I don't care. No, I of course I care. I don't wish this on anyone. I hope Joe Biden makes a full recovery. But I don't think that we can't walk and chew gum at the same time in life. I think that we can say, I hope Joe Biden recovers. I know prostate cancer treatments have come a long way in the last 5 to 10 years. Great, put that over here. And then over here say, well, we're talking about this period from at least 2022 to 2024 when he was president of the United States. We're not necessarily talking about his physical health. We're talking about his sort of like mental acuity and his ability to do the job. I don't think the fact that he has been diagnosed with cancer in May of 2025 means that we can't and shouldn't look at the allegations, the serious allegations in this book, at least from the excerpts I've seen, that Joe Biden, going back to 2022, and maybe as far back as 2017 when he was vice president, that there were signs that Joe Biden was physically and mentally declining, and that decline relatively rapidly picked up around mid-2022. Again, we can walk and chew gum. We can do two things at the same time. I know that people, first of all, I think two things are going on. I think Democrats do not want to talk about Joe Biden's mental acuity because the allegations in this book suggest that lots and lots of people in the Democratic Party, cabinet officials, elected officials, staff, raised real questions about Biden's ability to do the job and certainly to run for another 4 years in the job, and that those questions were roundly dismissed by the Biden inner circle, that they said he's fine and don't ask about it and you don't need to know and everything's good. So they don't want to have that conversation, which I understand politically speaking. But on the other hand, like, this is a guy who is the president of the United States for 4 years and thought and ran for a second term, at which point he would have been in his mid-80s had he won and served. So that to me is a really serious conversation about how did we get to this point, given that there were a lot of signs that suggested that Joe Biden definitely should not have run for a second term. How did we get to this point? It's a media story. It's a politics story. It's a sort of transparency story. And again, I always say this, if the shoe was on the other foot, if Donald Trump, God forbid, had been diagnosed post-presidency with prostate cancer, and there were real questions about his acuity and his physical abilities while he was in office, do you think Democrats would say, let's just drop all of this? No, of course they wouldn't, because it's an important conversation to have, because we're talking about the President of the United States. There's only been 45 of them ever. It is the most powerful job in the world. And if that person was compromised, and if people knew that person was compromised, and if they knew he was compromised and worked to keep that information from the public eye, that is a gigantic story that we cannot just walk away from because Joe Biden has been diagnosed with prostate cancer. We can do both. We can cover that story. We can say we hope he gets better. We can talk about his diagnosis and his prognosis, and I will do that. But we can also say there are all these questions raised by the Original Sin book, raised by the audio of the special counsel Robert Hur interview with Joe Biden, raised by what cabinet officials and elected officials on the Democratic Party have been saying, raised by what 2028 candidates are saying. Like, we can't ignore all of that because he's been diagnosed with prostate cancer. Look, I always say this. I want people, if people don't, if there are real questions about an elected official, those can't change because the elected official has a change in circumstance. It does not impact what happened in 2022 to 2024 that Joe Biden was diagnosed in 2025. I just don't believe that. And I don't think that makes me a cruel and terrible person who hates Joe Biden. I don't think of myself as a cruel and terrible person, and I know I don't hate Joe Biden. But I do think we can carry both of those ideas and both of those stories and do a good job as reporters covering both of them in a fulsome way. And I think it's important for the public and for democracy that we do that. If we had a president who was compromised, mentally or physically, we need to know more about that. Why didn't we know more about it at the time? Again, it's a media story, it's a politics story, it's a democracy story. I'm going to keep covering it. And thank you, as always, for understanding. And please don't attack people who do this in the comment section. This is simply two separate stories that are going to both get covered, and that does not make it a terrible person who does it. All right? Everyone, take good care. And I ask you, sorry, before you do that, do me a favor, subscribe. Again, calling balls and strikes, no matter what uniform the batter at the plate is wearing, more important now than ever, and I hope you can support it. Okay, take care.